You're going to love these Karen stories today, especially our title story. Woman damages my mom's car and blames my mom. Her corrupt cop boyfriend covers it up and ruins both of their reputations. Posted by Alex56789101. For some background, I live in a predominantly white suburban town in New Jersey, and my family is Asian. Although the town is alright for the most part, it's not really a secret that some of the townspeople are pretty racist. One of our neighbors, let's call him Anthony, is a retired police captain from another town, but he's friends with my town's police chief. My mother is a first-generation immigrant, and although she's fluent in English, she still has a pretty thick Asian accent. A couple of years ago, my mom went to visit one of her friends on the other side of town. My mom had parallel parked directly in front of her friend's house, which is at the bottom of a small hill. As she was leaving, a woman driving a Jeep Wrangler with her children was driving down the small hill, but she was still a decent distance back, so my mom pulled out of her spot. The road they were on was really wide, with enough space to fit 5 cars next to each other, and about 40 feet ahead was a stop sign. My mom at this point was already in the middle of the road, fully out of the parking spot, and had gotten about 10 feet when the woman driving the Jeep suddenly came up from behind my mom's car and cut directly in front of her, crossing a double yellow line to do so. Because of the angle she cut off my mom at, the Jeep's rear wheel ended up ripping off my mom's front bumper. My mom naturally immediately stopped, and the woman got out of her car after straightening it out on the road. As soon as she stepped out of her car, this woman, we'll call her Karen, immediately starts cursing my mom out at the top of her lungs. Karen told my mom to call the police, but my mom told her that her phone had died. My mom's friend and her son, as well as the neighbor, came out of the house after hearing the commotion to see what had happened. The neighbor, an elderly man, asked what happened, and Karen yelled, "Are you effing blind? An effing accident happened. Go call the police. I need to call my boyfriend." The son had taken a law class in college, so he offered to take a bunch of pictures of the scene of the accident and send them to my mom later. This becomes super important later. The neighbor calls the police, but Karen's boyfriend arrives at the scene first. When the cop, let's call him Kenny, finally arrives, he asks my mom what happened, and just as my mom had just started saying her side of the story, the cop says, "Wait just a minute," and walks over to the boyfriend. As it turns out, the boyfriend, we'll call him Sam, was a cop in the town who was pretty popular with the kids in the middle schools since he would occasionally visit to talk about things like DARE and other things in assemblies. Sam was off duty at the time, so he was able to come over when Karen called him. As soon as Kenny saw his bud Sam, he immediately went to go talk with him rather than with my mom or with Karen. They discussed it for a little while and afterwards sent everyone on their way. My mom tried to talk to Kenny before he left, but Kenny just brushed it off and said he got the details he needed and that my mom would be able to get the police report in about a week or two. When my mom receives a police report, she saw it said that she pulled out without using her blinkers suddenly and hit Karen's car. On top of that, Karen was expecting for my mom's insurance to pay for the damage done to her rear wheel. My mom went to my neighbor Anthony to ask what she should do about the report since it was clearly wrong. Anthony was furious and told her that she should go to the police station and ask to see the chief, and if they ask why she needs to see him, she should tell them that it's because she wants to file an internal complaint. That day, my mom takes the photographs sent to her by the son and goes to the police station and asks the person working the front desk to see the chief. The cop says that she could not just walk in and ask for the chief, so my mom responds, "Okay, so where should I go to file an internal complaint?" And the cop immediately straightens up and says, "Right here, come with me." He leads her into the back. The deputy chief steps into the room and started recording the conversation. Since the chief was out, my mom presented all of the evidence to him instead. After presenting the evidence to show that it was in fact Karen that hit her instead of the other way around, my mom also says that she would like to file a corruption complaint against both Kenny and Sam. Kenny clearly did not do his job properly, since he did not properly ask the actual people involved in the accident and did not even note the fact that there were 2 passengers in Karen's car in the report. Even Karen later admitted to an investigator that Kenny never once spoke to her. My mom even threw in the racist card for good measure, saying that maybe Kenny wouldn't listen to her and brushed her off because of her thick Asian accent. Sam, meanwhile, had interfered with the investigation despite not being at the scene of the crime during the time of the accident. the deputy chief says he will start an internal investigation and will see if anything needs to be done. Meanwhile, my mom also filed a claim to her insurance and presented the evidence to them too, and her insurance decides that since the accident, in their eyes, was clearly not her fault, they weren't going to pay Karen a penny, and that they would contact Karen's insurance to pay my mom instead. A lot of internal bureaucratic investigational BS happens, including interviews with Karen, my mom's friend, and the friend's neighbor. About a month passed and an officer comes to our house to tell my mom that Kenny had been punished, but there was not enough evidence to punish Sam, and he just wanted to know if there were any other concerns that she had. Since Karen seemingly had not done anything to further warrant any action and the damage to the car was paid for, my mom said that there was nothing else. This is the fun part. 3 days after the officer came to our door, a letter came in the mail for a court hearing. Turns out, Karen decided to file 3 tickets about my mom just 1 day before the statute of limitations. Apparently in New Jersey, citizens are allowed to file complaints about other citizens breaking the law, a thing that our family had never heard of before until this happened, and because of how late she filed these complaints, by the time we received them in the mail, we could not even counter-complain, and the only options were to pay the fine or go to court. We assumed that Karen learned about being able to file complaint from Sam, because no crap, and that the only reason she was willing to go this far is because she heard my mom had a super thick Asian accent and assumed that my mom wouldn't know what to do about the tickets and would just pay up. What she didn't count on was the fact that my mom is actually really aggressive with an absolutely massive network of people that she knows. Within a day, my mom hired a lawyer to fight the case, and they immediately asked to change the court from the small court in our town to one of the large courts a couple towns away. The logic was that if she fought the case in our town, my mom would be at a disadvantage since her case was essentially going against our town's beloved police force. But by putting it in a different town, the playing field would be even. Additionally, while my mom worked from home in her own business, Karen had a full-time job in town, so going to court in a different town would be a huge pain in the butt for her. The lawyer had prepared a huge amount of evidence against Karen, so there was no way she was actually going to win the case no matter what. Come the court date, Karen never showed up, so the case was thrown out. That was a pretty nice win, but what came after was even better. Since my mother and sister have a lot of friends in town, the story of Karen and Sam doing this shady bullcrap got out really fast. Soon, half the town had heard about it, and suddenly Karen and Sam went from 2 favorites in the town because of Sam's reputation to 2 of the most underhanded and nasty people. Sam stopped getting invited to school assemblies, and Karen was ostracized in her kids' school PTA. Anthony also ended up talking to the police chief in private, and we found out that although Sam was not officially punished, he was severely reprimanded by the chief. Old employer stole my hours. I turned her in for Medicaid fraud. Posted by I Am Not Spartan. Oh boy, here we go. This story starts about 7 or so years ago, but you'll need some background info first. After I graduated high school, I wasn't able to afford college, so I became a CNA at a nursing home. It was a crappy job. Literally, I worked there for about 8 months before I left to work for a healthcare agency where I could make my own schedule and also work home care cases. Most of my patients were only allowed a home health aide temporarily while they recovered from surgery or an illness, or sometimes their insurance would only cover a few hours a day when they really needed much more. After several months, my agency called me about a patient that was disabled and approved for 9 hours a day, every day. She was considered a permanent case as someone from the state would come twice a year to evaluate and authorize continuation of home services. I ended up working with this lady, Jerry, for about 2 years with the agency. She was a sweet woman, and although there was a generation gap, we got along great. She had a sister, Nancy, who was a self-proclaimed advocate for her sister and her very handicapped daughter, Jessica. I always admired her because she was dealt a crap card with having to care for not only her sister, but a daughter who was unable to care for herself. We lived in New York State, and they had recently come out with this CDPAP program that would allow the family to appoint people as caregivers. They would then choose a healthcare agency to process the paychecks.
It was nice because it allowed families to have more control over the care they received, and more importantly, you could get paid for taking care of your own family members. But there were limitations. One of which was that you couldn't get paid to work with your own child. It had to be a sibling or some other kind of relationship. Nancy really liked me, and when she asked if I'd be willing to work with Jerry and Jessica under this program, I said, heck yes. At the time, Jerry and Jessica lived in different places, but the family was able to get them Section 8 vouchers and move them to the same apartment building so that the aides could do split shifts. With the amount of hours between the two of them, I was easily working a minimum of 40 hours a week. Then things changed. Nancy realized that she could get paid for literally doing nothing. The program is flawed in that the patient is approved for a certain amount of hours, and all you do is fill in weekly timesheets, print a schedule of when people are supposed to work, and return them to the agency that processes the paychecks. There's no way to prove that someone is actually there taking care of the person. At first, Nancy started filling out timesheets for herself whenever there were hours left over for the week, hours that no one worked. She could only claim these hours for Jerry, so she would fill out a different timesheet for her son, saying that he worked with Jessica whenever she had leftover hours. Now, her son did actually help out from time to time, but not for all the hours that she was claiming. Eventually, Nancy got greedy and started deliberately stealing hours from me and the other aides. It got so bad that she pushed us out by not scheduling us. I was struggling financially at the time, so this was devastating to me. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college, and here I was working my butt off so I could take a few community college classes and pay my bills. There had been some Medicaid cuts, so it wasn't like I could just find another patient. I was still technically employed at my old agency, and none of their offices had work because there just wasn't enough. Now, on to the revenge. The second that I realized what Nancy was doing, I started taking pictures of the weekly schedules and everyone's timesheets. And then, once I stopped working there, I called up the Attorney General's Medicaid fraud unit and reported her. I explained the entire story, and for a while, I didn't hear anything. And then, I heard back from an investigator, and I gave him all of the details that he wanted. I had copies of schedules and timesheets to show that Nancy was pretending to schedule aides, but ultimately putting herself and her son on the timesheets. I also had another aide as a witness to back up all of my claims. More months passed, and then I got a call saying that the CDPAP program was a gray area for them, and there wasn't much that they can do because it's hard to prove cases like this. So I just let it go and forgot all about it. Then, almost 2 years ago, I got a call from the Attorney General's office, and it turns out the case was sent to another investigator and reopened. They wanted to meet with me and go over some evidence. It was over 3 years after I made the complaint, so many of the smaller details had been lost. Turns out, they had been spending the last few years building a case against the family, and they were nearly ready to go to court. And man, did they have a lot of evidence. Apparently, Nancy had forged my signature on timesheets to put hours that I had worked with Jerry under Jessica so she could claim all the hours for Jerry. Then, she was filling out timesheets for her son who wasn't working because he was away at college in a different state. She was just pocketing all the money for herself. I ended up moving across the country shortly after, so I had completely forgotten about all of this. Then, last week, I randomly Googled Nancy's name and had a mini freakout when I read the news articles. Turns out that Nancy and her son were arrested a year ago and charged with a few felonies each. Nancy must have taken a deal because she pled guilty earlier this year to one of the felonies and was ordered to pay back over $100,000 that she stole from the state. She also got 5 years probation. Not only that, but it made the local news, and it's the first thing that comes up when you Google her name, which I have changed for the purpose of this story. Shot Up House is the price for screwing with retirement, posted by Throw Me Away Ferretti. Sorry for the throwaway, but this situation is still within the statute of limitations and goes across state lines in the USA. Names have been changed to protect the parties that need protection and to conform with the rules of Reddit. So our cast is: Jim and Betty are the owners of the property. Kirsten is the daughter, or me in this case. Tilda is Betty's sister, and Larry is Tilda's husband. Sonny, Larry Jr., and Mike are Larry and Tilda's children. Backstory. Many years ago, in rural Appalachia and coal country, lived a cluster of families on a holler. Jim and Betty owned a mobile home and had their daughter Kirsten with them. This mobile home was 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, but it was sufficient enough for shelter. During the middle of 1980s, a recession hit Appalachia hard, and Jim found work in another part of the country. In moving, he approached Larry and Tilda to look after the mobile home and collect rent for anyone that wanted to lease the mobile home. A rent amount was agreed to and would be adjusted for inflation and the cost of living for the area. The money was to be deposited into a savings account except for the money needed for necessary repairs and receipts kept. Jim and Betty trusted their siblings with this and moved, trusting that this money would be part of their retirement fund. I was privy to these conversations, but did not pay that much attention to them at the time. Shortly after leaving Appalachia, a renter was found, and Jim and Betty were glad to know that something was coming about from the land in their home area. Then, Mike moved into their mobile home, and Jim stipulated that the rental agreement did not change, even with his nephew renting the mobile home. After Mike moved out, Sonny moved in and stayed for several years. Betty asked Tilda several times about the rent, knowing Sonny was very unreliable with rent in the past and was assured that between Section 8 and food stamps that the rent was being paid on time and there were no issues. A few repairs had been done, but the receipts were stored in the safety deposit box where the savings account was. Fast forward a few more years. Sonny finally moves out and there are a few more renters, and then the taxes are not getting paid. The mobile home will not pass for Section 8 any longer. As we, Jim, Betty, and I, have been told repairs have been made over the years, we find this odd and inquire again to Tilda, who states that this was all just a misunderstanding. Once again, Betty trusts her sister and is relieved when we get the tax receipt in the mail. This is very important later. Another few years pass and Tilda dies. Jim and Betty attend the funeral, and Betty makes a gesture to assist with some of the expenses. Larry agrees, and Betty requests access to the savings account that should have at least tens of thousands of dollars by this point, not including interest, to only find out it has never existed. All of the paperwork has been fraudulent or forged. Remember that tax receipt? Another forgery. Betty refused to fight. She had just lost her sister. Still, Jim is livid, as am I. Sonny was always abusive to me, and to find out she had been living off my parents for free while receiving Section 8 for rent and getting food stamps sent me over the edge, on top of the missing retirement funds. Cue revenge. So, knowing everything was fraudulent from the beginning, Jim and I attempted legal means first to get revenge on this thief. We were met with walls of red tape, and with states separating us, it was an uphill battle with a slim chance of winning. Plus, the attorney fees would drain any winnings and then more. First, I put my piece into action. Against Sonny, I filed claims of fraud against the Section 8 anonymously and SNAP benefits, given that there was absolutely no proof of rent being paid to the homeowner or the custodian. Larry was stupid enough not to write out a fraudulent receipt for when his daughter lived there. Next, I filed against Larry for tax evasion and Social Security fraud, since Sonny was claiming to be paying him the rent money via Section 8. This was income. Since he was not claiming this income on his tax forms, he was double dipping into the Social Security system and avoiding paying taxes. I did the same for the time Mike was paying rent, although he did not claim government benefits, he just paid rent. The next stage was to notify their local church about the shady dealings with family. Their faith is big on lay ministers and credibility. I told anyone and everyone I could from the church directory about what had happened. I even showed the fake tax receipt. The last bit was the most nefarious. After ensuring that Larry was visiting Sonny and the house that he owned was empty, a rented car was used, and while Betty drove, Jim used a .22 rifle to shoot holes in the roof, the AC compressor, the garage doors, and anything that was laying in the yard and not immediately noticeable. We wanted the burn to last, so no windows were shot out or anything evident from the start showed. Aftermath. Sonny is now being investigated for multiple charges of fraud. Her side business has been closed due to the sweeping allegations that money will not be allocated as intended. Her applications for small business loans and COVID funds have been denied. Criminal charges are being whispered, but I do not think that anything will come about with that portion. Larry has been found guilty of overpayment by the Social Security Administration and no longer receives benefits. He now lives with Sonny and no longer has his truck, his camper, boat, or ATVs. Unfortunately, once again, criminal charges are not pending. Larry Jr. has moved into the old home that was shot up. The roof had several places where hail or other debris punched through and made it leak. The siding had similar damage. Some of the bullets, and they finally figured out what it was, pierced some of the old PVC and plastic plumbing. He has spent a fortune fixing the roof, the plumbing, and the siding where a lot of little holes were. I don't know if he's tried the AC yet, and I will be delighted to find out if it malfunctions as severely as I hope. Funny comment and answer here from OP. Says, which side was Hatfield and which ones are the McCoys? Man, you all there hold a grudge longer than the Italians and the Irish in East Coast cities. And OP replies, funny thing is, my family has both clans intermixed. Betty's side is Hatfield and Jim's side is McCoy. Karen demands ownership of my property, but I am the owner. See if you would handle this, Karen, like the original poster did. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss out, and I'll see you there.